of gold.
After, of course, consulting his own God, he's told that these metals represent a sequence of various kingdoms, and Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar that you, O king, are this head of gold. The head of gold represents Babylon.
And it's very appropriate that that be the symbol for Babylon, which was gilded in gold, famous for its gold.
Babylon was one of the most spectacular cities of the ancient world. If you look at the size of Babylon, it was larger than Rome, larger than Athens. It was just an enormous city that was situated just about 25 miles south of Baghdad in modern Iraq.
Historians tell us that there was more gold in Babylon, and probably they're using hyperbole, but you can get a feel for the richness of ancient Babylon, that there was more gold in Babylon than there was dust. It was the great golden kingdom of antiquity.
Excavations that have taken place there beginning in 1899 by the Germans have revealed a city that was surrounded by triple walls.
The walls of Babylon consisted of actually two systems of walls. And they surrounded the city, and these two systems, each one consisted of 3 separate walls. So you had a total of 6 walls surrounding the whole city. It was massive.
This brick is actually a brick from the walls of Babylon. Every brick made during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar was stamped with his name in it.
There were over 200 pagan temples. The famous ziggurat, of course, was the central temple, and many gods were worshipped. Nebuchadnezzar built many altars, temples, sanctuaries. And it was a very polytheistic society, a very sophisticated society. The literature and the language was something that, at that time, the Akkadian language was basically the lingua franca of the world, like English is today. Anyone doing commerce, anyone doing any kind of diplomatic relations would be communicating in that language. And so the Babylonian Empire not only spread, but it was very influential as well.
Nebuchadnezzar didn't like the idea that he was only the head of gold. He wanted to be the whole thing. And so he set up a great image of gold where the whole thing was of gold in Daniel chapter 3, the very next chapter, and he had a lot of his people bow down and worship. Now, William Shea has pointed out that this was possibly a time of conflict in the empire when there was some possible disloyalty to Nebuchadnezzar going on, so he was having everyone pledge loyalty to him.
When you read the document coming from Babylon, we discover that in about 10th year of his reign, a rebellion broke out. And rebellion was so severe at one point in his court that the text says that he had to take his own sword and defend his own life. Fortunately, soldiers came in and he was able to survive this rebellion. And of course, those involved were punished, executed. But the problem was Nebuchadnezzar did not know who else was involved in this rebellion, in this plot. So he is asking that court officials would pledge new allegiance to him. And he is bringing the people into the Babylon just to make sure that they understand that they have to be obedient to him, they have to accept him as sovereign king and ruler. Now this comes very, very close to the events of chapter 3, where we do have the statue he built, and people who were there were supposed to bow down and pay respect. We have a list on the tablet mentioning about 100 names of the people who were invited to Babylon to pledge this new allegiance. And among these names, there are 3 names which are very similar to those 3 young men that we read in the Bible, in the book of Daniel chapter 3, they did not bow down. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were nobility. They were friends of Daniel. They were part of the upper elite society of Jerusalem, and all 3 of them with Daniel were taken as captives to be trained in Nebuchadnezzar's court.
Those who don't bow down, which are the friends of Daniel, he has them thrown into a fiery furnace and heated up very hot. It's like a brick kiln. Nobody could survive anywhere near it. In fact, the people that threw them in were killed. But the fact that the whole image is of gold really shows that Nebuchadnezzar is rebelling against the vision of Daniel chapter 2. He's not accepting that God is just allowing him to be the head of gold. He wants to be the whole thing and go to the end and reign forever. And so he has some hard lessons to learn.
Because in Nebuchadnezzar's mind, Babylon is not a temporary kingdom. Babylon is the apex of all kingdoms. It is the unending kingdom. And so Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, you are this head of gold. Nebuchadnezzar must have loved that. But he didn't love what came next. Take a look at verse 39. But after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, then a third kingdom of bronze, which shall bear rule over all the earth.
Nebuchadnezzar was listening to that and probably didn't like it, but he heard in Daniel chapter 2, 39, that after you, that's after you, Nebuchadnezzar, after the Babylonian kingdom, another kingdom will come.
Now, I'm sure that Nebuchadnezzar did not like those two words there, after you. But Daniel says, after you, another kingdom will arise, and then a third kingdom of bronze. So now you get a feel for what the interpretation of the dream is. The gold represents Babylon. After that, the silver represents another kingdom, and then a third kingdom of bronze, and then that critical phrase there, which shall bear rule over all the earth. Now, here's a critical thing to understand. That phrase, which shall bear rule over all the earth, lets you know that these are not mere regional or tribal powers. These are world-ruling entities, world-ruling powers. Babylon was the greatest nation of antiquity up to that point. But Babylon would be succeeded by another kingdom.
Well, the conquest of Babylon is rather interesting. The Persians come up to the city and they surround the city. Of course, from the book of Daniel's perspective, Belshazzar the king is trapped in there with his nobility, and they feel quite safe. The walls of Babylon were very sturdy, very strong.
Belshazzar knows that Cyrus is invading, that he's approaching, but he's not afraid. Babylon is invincible. It's got the walls around the city, it's got canals, it's got moats, and it's safe.